Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I have a deck review for you. I wanted to review the Wisdom Keeper's Oracle by Rosy Aronson. I remember seeing this deck, oh gosh, I don't know how long ago, maybe 2 years ago, roughly, give or take. I'm not very good with time. I remember seeing the first edition, which is a black and white copy of the deck, and I remember thinking, there's something about that deck. There's something about it that I really like, but I am a fan of colour. I wasn't so drawn to the black and white edition that I was ready to press buy. So when Rosie contacted me, I think in December last year, and she told me that it was now in a coloured edition, I said yes to her sending me a copy, and I'm so very glad I did, because this deck has just blown me away. When I first got this deck back in late December, while I was unboxing it, I had to stop and put it down and take a breath because I was in tears. It was making me cry. There's something about the eyes of the characters in each of these cards. I just felt seen. I felt seen and appreciated and loved, and I felt validated. It was a really powerful and moving experience. But before we get into my experience, I'll just kind of go over the hardware, what you can expect when you get it. It comes in this hard, really nice, solid two-part box. It has the butterfly or the dragonfly on the inside, and the cards are really big. They're beautiful, but they are big. You get 64 oracle cards and then this mirror, which when you peel off this plastic actually does look very much like a mirror. I've seen it in other people's videos. I'm not using this at all, but I do like the idea of it. I think it's quite clever. So this is the backing, and it's quite a pretty, it's a chunky deck. This is a regular Centennial tarot card, and it is much bigger. I certainly won't be using it as in spreads. Others might want to do something different, but for me there's just so much in these cards. It's almost like sitting down with a friend and having a coffee or a cup of tea. I almost don't want to have a big spread, because then, you know, just like a party, you go to a party and you're just socializing as opposed to sitting down with one friend and really, you know, having a D&M. That's what it feels like with these cards. It feels like you really need to be present with the individual card. So while it might not be the easiest deck to handle, I'm quite happy to make that compromise, that sacrifice of an easy shuffler for this sort of deck, for this sort of imagery. I think it's quite a obvious sacrifice to make, just so you can really get to know these amazing characters. The cards themselves, they're quite thick, but because they're so big they don't feel as thick as perhaps they would if they were smaller, if that makes sense. They're a decent card stock, but because they're so big they're still quite flexible. They're quite glossy, and when I first got the deck it was quite sticky, but that has reduced with use. I cannot shuffle them this way. I can just get my fingers around, so I shuffle them lengthways, and I don't really have a problem with that. And I can actually shuffle them, riffle shuffle them. Not the easiest to do, but you can do it. It does come with a little guidebook in the box, and it's really extensive. Lots and lots of information, and lots of really, I love this guidebook. Rosie did also send me the larger guidebook, which I think you can purchase separately. However, keep in mind that it's, as far as I can tell, and I've tried to check, you know, a few different pages throughout the book, they're the same book. This one's just bigger and easier to read. Now there is a lot going on in this deck, and I'll try to explain it to the best of my understanding. I don't understand all of the systems that are involved in this deck, but that hasn't stopped me enjoying every second that I've spent with it. I think the fact that so much thought and study has gone into creating this deck really does reflect in just how potent the messages are. So even if you don't understand all of the systems that are used, it doesn't limit the deck in any way. So I'll start by reading a little bit of the introduction. These are paradoxical times on our planet, times of great suffering and times of great promise. More than ever, our survival as a species depends on our ability to honour and respect our differences while acknowledging and embracing our interconnectedness. These faces embody the very kind of peace, love and understanding that I long to see in the world and experience in myself. They represent both ancient and new human archetypes that connect us with our collective evolution and indigenous roots. She then goes on to talk about the power and the importance of the human face, and she calls it the organ of emotion. The 64 faces of awakening have come specifically to recognize your potential, reflect on your beauty, and receive your love. Connect with each face as you would a friend, a grandmother, a mentor, a lover, or a guide. Though each face is different, they all come to love you unconditionally, to reveal important truths about who you are, and to help you remember the dreams that have been seeded in your soul. And she talks a little bit about her creative process, which I always love reading about with different decks. And she does say that whilst the majority of the characters or the humans, the people in these cards, have come out of her imagination or dreams, on occasion she has been drawn to depict individuals or mixes of individuals in the cards. And as I move through the cards, I feel very much like I've met these people before. And I'm never sure whether that's because this card that I'm looking at has been inspired by an individual, perhaps a public figure, and I just can't quite place it, or whether it's just because they're so real and because they just feel so authentic. So when I move through these cards, I have that sensation of nostalgia or of recognition. I feel like I've seen or met these people somewhere in the past. I can't quite pinpoint it. Perhaps in another life, I'm not sure. I feel like that I know these people from somewhere. And for me, that was a really unique experience. I haven't had that before with a deck. I might have had it with 1 or 2 cards within a deck, but not an entire deck. Next, she talks about how she came to establish the stories that each of the cards offer. In the guidebook, every card has its own wisdom story. I really like the stories of the cards. They're never quite what I anticipate them to be when I draw the card and just look at, the image and the keyword. Each card speaks from first person, and they kind of start by describing how they used to be, how they used to act, what used to drive them, and then kind of the obstacle or the challenge or that low point that made them change, do something different, learn that lesson. And that lesson is the message of the card. So it's a really beautiful way, I think, of presenting the meanings for the cards. You aren't just told, be positive. You're told how someone used to kind of fester in their negativity and what that did to their lives, and how they then moved into a more positive space. I think we can learn a lot from someone else's journey. So each card tells their story, and then it has my gift to you, which is again in first person, and I guess is more the meaning of the card rather than the story of how we got to that meaning. And then there are questions for contemplation. And there's, 5 to 10 questions for each and every card, which kind of get you thinking about how you can make changes or what you can focus on. And I think most of them make really, really good journal prompts too. Another aspect of this deck is something called gene keys. Now, I had never heard that term before, and I still know very little about the concept, but she does give you a bit of an introduction. She says, the gene keys is a body of knowledge aimed to help transform our core self-beliefs, expand our consciousness, and release our individual creative genius into the world. There are 64 gene keys, and there's a book by a guy called Richard Rudd, which apparently explains all of this stuff a whole lot better. And those 64 correspond to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, and 64 is a number to do with our DNA as well. And so from this basis, she's established these 64 archetypes for the cards. An aspect of the gene keys are 3 essential concepts: the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi or shidhi. I've heard it pronounced both ways. Perhaps there's a different way to pronounce it. I'm not sure, so I apologize. She explains that these define a spectrum of consciousness and refer to archetypal states that correlate with the human experimental stages of survival, service, and surrender. So for each card, the key word is the gift of the card. And in the guidebook, we also get what the shadow and the siddhi are as well. And she gives you a little key in the introduction to get you started on what each of these 3 things are. For the shadow, she says, when we are worried about our survival and fear is in the driver's seat, we find ourselves in shadow territory. Our shadows can be expressed in repressive or reactive ways. The gift, when we are more oriented towards serving others and honouring ourselves than protecting and defending ourselves, we more naturally share our gifts with others and feel a sense of belonging in the world. And then she says the siddhi or the shidhi refers to when we have entered a pure state of expansion and have completely surrendered our sense of separateness into the whole. And she says, you will notice in this deck that the Wisdom Keeper stories focus primarily on the shadow and the gift expressions of each archetype. The Shiddic or Siddic realms are communicated energetically in the cards through the expression in the eyes, the symbols on the face, and the invitation into a sacred relationship. She goes on to talk more about the shadow and how we can approach using this deck. And for each and every card we get a number which is associated with these gene keys. 3 words referring to the gift, the shadow, and the shiddi, as we've spoken about, and a program partner, which has to do with gene keys. Each card also has universal symbols all over their faces, and these are beautiful, and I understand that they're not supposed to be explained, but me being an airy, curious person, part of me does wish that in the explanations there was an explanation of why these symbols were chosen for these cards. That's the only thing that isn't present, but I know that that's not really the point of the cards. And when I first got the deck, that was something that I kind of was a bit upset about, but now the more that I've used them, I've realized that that's not the point of them. I experience the symbols subconsciously, and if I were to bring that into a conscious understanding of listed out in the book, that would change my experience with these cards entirely. So I know I've done a lot of talking because there's a lot to this deck, and I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what's going on. But now I will just show you some of the cards, because I know that that's really the most important thing for a lot of people. And they're just so amazing. I find myself just kind of sitting with them and looking into their eyes. And like I said, I feel seen and loved and understood on a really, really heart level. It's a really wonderful experience just to be with these cards. The guidebook is amazing and I almost always use it. But first I will take a minute, 5 minutes, whatever I have, to just sit with these cards and be in relation to the characters of the cards. Their messages in the guidebooks are all of the ones that I've experienced so far have been amazing. I read through the introduction part of the book, and since then I've just been reading the messages from each card that I draw of a morning. And I've been highlighting and kind of doing notes as I would with any other book that I read. But my experience of these cards is very individual. I focus on the individual. Mostly it's been daily draws. I have also done like a card for the week and spent a little bit more time with the person in the card. Oh, they're just beautiful. And I love the use of colour. You know, like these cheeks are just a little overdone, but in a really, really beautiful, soft way. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, it's strange how not real the elements are of the cards, like the colours and then all of these symbols all over them, and yet how real the faces and the eyes feel. I don't know, it's a really interesting sort of way of portraying these characters, these people. See, this is one that reminds me very clearly of a public figure, which might for you as well. So some of them do just stand out more so as people that I've seen. Whereas others not so much, but I still somehow feel like I know them and I just love them. I love that there is a real beautiful diversity to these cards, and I especially love that although there are a few younger people depicted in the images, the majority are older, and I like that because that's not something that we see a lot in cards or art or anything like that, and it's certainly not something that we see celebrated often enough. And I think that Rosy has certainly done a wonderful job of not only depicting diversity but celebrating wisdom and age. I have been asked if this deck feels too busy, and my answer for me personally has been no. I don't like busy decks. If you've noticed, probably a lot of my favourite decks are they're beautiful, but they're almost cartoonish for a lot of people. I tend to prefer more simple decks. Decks like the Shadowscapes, for example, that was too busy for me. And whilst there is a lot of detail in these cards, they don't feel too busy to me. The black and white one I've never owned personally, the black and white deck, but seeing it online it almost did feel too busy. Whereas I think the colour in this deck kind of brings a smoothness to the imagery. I don't know what it is. It kind of brings a cohesiveness to the elements within the cards that make it not feel too busy for me. I mean, we'll all be different, but for me personally, as someone who doesn't like too much busyness in cards, this deck doesn't feel too busy. I think the size of the cards also helps that. You know, they're not all crammed into a tiny little card. They're big and each individual element gets to speak on its own. It doesn't feel crammed in. So I think that does help as well. So I think what we'll do now is I will shuffle a deck and draw a card for us and just read what is in the guidebook so you can get an idea of what it's like to use this deck. because I've said a lot of stuff so far. I've spoken about a lot of different elements of this deck. So I think if we just draw a card and kind of see what that card has to offer, I think that might kind of bring it all together for you a little bit better. Guidance number 7. She's amazing. Each card starts with just like a one-line little sentence about the card. This one says, the real leader is the ultimate listener. The gift is guidance. The shadow is division. And the shitty or city is virtue. And the programming partner is number 13. So her wisdom story. When I was little, I trusted and admired the peace-loving elders in my community. As I grew, my people experienced more oppression from the outside world, and new leaders appeared who believed that it was time to fight fire with fire. At first, I hid. I handed my authority over to the elders who maintained the peaceful ways of our ancestors. But when our community was attacked again and again, I handed my authority over to the leaders who fought back. I watched them become more and more like our enemies as divisiveness grew in our village. I was tired of giving my power away to dictator types who never bothered to ask what I thought or how I felt. I was tired of waiting for others to get it right, so I stepped forward as a leader and fought for my people and for justice everywhere. Over the years, I attracted many followers. Always certain I was on the right side of justice, a deep ambition grew in me that was fueled by an anger I hadn't yet owned. One day I scolded at a young woman for not listening to me or following my advice. Her tears showed me that I had lost my way. From that day on, I stopped leading and started listening. I discovered that every community member was wise and capable of making an important contribution to our people's path. Today I am no longer fueled by a fear of oppression or the desire for external recognition. I don't need everyone to understand the way I lead or why I do what I do. What drives me now is a deep love of service and the belief that there is no such thing as a healthy community without healthy, free, and autonomous individuals. When I guide groups, I interfere as little as possible and always find that each person's wisdom and gifts just naturally rise to the surface. The less I push my agenda for the group, the deeper the communication, the more transformative the action, and the smoother the implementation of the vision becomes. There will be more and more leaders like me as we move into the future. I know this to be true. Thus, I am able to trust in humanity, even during these turbulent times. My gift to you. I am here to share that true leadership is not about forcefully imposing an agenda or interfering in others' lives. It is about lovingly empowering from behind the scenes. Be not driven by the fear of oppression or the love of power, but by a profound love of service. I am here to provide you with true guidance. I come to recognize the wise, free leader in you and to help you trust in your own direction. I am listening. So that is a little glimpse into what working with this deck is like. There's a little bit more information at the back end of the book. She gives you a few spreads, a little bit more about working with the deck, as well as some resources for delving further into some of the themes and topics discussed in the guidebook. So it's an incredible deck. I'm so grateful to have it. It's amazing. The production value is incredible too, if that's something that you really care about. But actually just working with these cards, it's heart level, soul level, moving and profound. It's been really, really powerful for me, and it just feels really special and sacred. I take my time when I'm working with this deck. I slow down, I breathe deeper. I don't know, there's just something really special about connecting and being in relation to these cards. So I really hope you found this review interesting and helpful if you're interested in getting this deck. Personally, I would highly recommend it for anyone who wants to work intimately with a deck, who wants to learn more about themselves and how they react and respond to the world around them. This deck is certainly one of personal development. It's also a spiritual one too. I wouldn't say, at least for me, that it's really a divinatory tool. It's certainly a reflective, self-improvement, self-exploration sort of deck. So I hope I've done this deck justice. I think it's a really, really, really special deck. I can't think of anything any other deck that I've had any kind of similar experience with. But I'm sure this review is long enough already, so if you have any comments or questions, please leave those below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And until next time guys, much love. Bye.